Perry Park has been long considered the home of football in Brisbane. A stadium with over 100 years of history, the Brisbane City Council purchased Perry Park in 1967 and converted it into a rectangular stadium for the use of the World Game. The Story venue hosted Brisbane City and the Brisbane Lions in the early days of the NSL, and for a time it also hosted the Brisbane Strikers before they moved to Lang Park. There was a record crowd of over 8,000 fans at the venue for the 1977 NSL Cup final between Brisbane City and Marconi. It even hosted a Socceroos International in 1992, a World Cup qualifier for the 1994 World Cup against Tahiti, which Australia won 2-0. In more modern times, Perry Park is still the home of the Brisbane Strikers, but it does host A-League women matches and it does host Australia Cup matches as well. But the venue has remained basically untouched since it was first refurbished for use in the NSL back in the late 1970s. And while there's been wide public support within the football community, there are no concrete plans by the government to redevelop the ground. It's part of a broader issue across the city of Brisbane, where there is only really one rectangular stadium capable of hosting top-level quality football. That venue, of course, is Lang Park, or known by its sponsorship name, Suncorp Stadium. It's the home of the Brisbane Broncos in the NRL, as well as the Dolphins on a part-time basis. It is also a host of the Queensland Reds in the Super Rugby competition. It does also host the Reds and the Broncos NRLW games from time to time. And of course it's the home of the Brisbane Roar in the A-League men's competition, and every once in a while there tends to be a doubleheader with the women's as well. That's a lot of traffic across one venue. And let's not forget about the amount of concerts that Lang Park hosts. It makes the quality of the surface absolutely atrocious. And we saw that during last season's A-League competition when there was a double header with the Brisbane Roar men and women, and the surface was basically non-existent. In order to take the pressure and the load off Lang Park, there's been many within the football community in Brisbane that want to see Perry Park redeveloped into a boutique stadium that would have a capacity between 15 to 20,000. In December last year, Chris, a local Brisbane resident, put forward a petition to the Queensland Parliament. He noticed the awful conditions at a double-header Brisbane A-League game, as well as Brisbane's inability to host the Australia Cup final because its surface was being upgraded after the end of the NRL season. His petition received thousands of signatures, and in today's video, I sat down with Chris and we had a bit of a conversation about his petition, about the situation, the stadium situation within Brisbane, and how things are looking moving forward for football's hope to have a secondary rectangular stadium within the Brisbane CBD area. Now, before I jump into the chat with Chris, I'd love it if you're able to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit the like button if you haven't done so already, and let us know in the comments what you make of the situation with Brisbane in its lack of top-level rectangular football facilities. Well, today I'm joined by Chris on the A-League Couch Critics, and we're talking a bit about his petition he put to the Queensland government late last year. Chris, thanks for joining us today. How are you going?
Good. Thanks, Brad. How are you?
Yeah, no, I'm doing pretty well. It's pretty cold where I'm from. I can imagine you're quite humid and warm up there in sunny Brisbane.
Temperature came down a little bit because we had a big storm about 3 hours ago, but yeah, it's pretty pleasant. I'm in a t-shirt, so it can't be that bad.
I guess people don't really know. You were the guy behind a petition that went a bit viral over soccer Twitter. It was on Reddit. It was all on social media. I guess, why did you have this? Tell us about the petition and why you decided to head up this petition to get an upgrade for Perry Park.
So I really started thinking about this idea not long after the Women's World Cup. You know, Brisbane had probably the most memorable moment, I think, for a lot of Australians when we won that quarterfinal against France in that shootout. And all the talk in town from political circles in the media was all about legacy and this legacy for football and women's sport as a result of the tournament. And having had the privilege to go to that game at Suncorp and be there for that, it was amazing. And that feeling, I didn't want it to go away. But, you know, not long after we got knocked out, that talk of legacy started sort of dying away pretty quickly. The Lord Mayor gave the Matildas the key to the city of Brisbane. Anastasia Palaszczuk, then the Premier, said, you know, we're going to build a statue outside of Suncorp Stadium to commemorate that moment. And then there wasn't much. not much got talked about. There was some funding in the Legacy Fund for, I think, some infrastructure and programs, but it wasn't life-changing money for the sport in Queensland. So that was where I started. And as things went on, I got more and more frustrated. So the next big thing was that the Raw made the Australia Cup final last year. And all the talk was pretty much that Football Australia really wanted to host it here in Brisbane, except that there's only one stadium in Brisbane and the surrounding area. That's Suncorp Stadium, and it was undergoing maintenance after the Women's World Cup, and it was all scheduled in, so we couldn't host it there, and off to Sydney it went. So for me, that was a cup final opportunity missed out on, which was, again, pretty frustrating. And then once the A-League season actually started, the pitch quality at Suncorp Stadium dropped through a hole in the floor. We had a number of concerts played on the surface, not long after the Women's World Cup finished. Most notably, early November, I think it was Paul McCartney and Def Leppard and Motley Crue played shows there, and it tore the pitch up like nothing else. And not long after that, the Raw hosted a doubleheader with the women and the men there. I think it was the first Indigenous round the Raw have put on. And I've never seen so many players fall over in my life. There was just no grip on the ground for their boots. I think we put together a little compilation at one point of all the slips and slides from that particular match, which is good fun if you can find it. But for me, that was enough. I'd already started trying to talk to people about like, what can we do to find a new home and get some infrastructure and a proper legacy out of the Women's World Cup. But that was the final straw. And you know, we'd been talking about it in our little group. What can we do? How do we get a petition together? And that was the final straw. Put it together, put it out there, and off we went.
I think I read the response from the state minister, whoever he was, that responded to the petition. I can imagine you weren't particularly thrilled with the response. I read the response. I wasn't particularly especially about the part where they talked about there's already 4 rectangle stadiums in an 80-kilometre radius of the CBD of Brisbane. And I mean, those other stadiums he talked about was in the Gold Coast, was in Redcliffe, which I believe is not necessarily a part of Brisbane, or might be on the outskirts of Brisbane. What did you make of the response?
There was the response from Michael Healy, the sports minister. It was not unexpected. Disappointing, of course. Like, I would have loved him to go, yeah, let's do it. 100%, no problems. But, you know, we can be realistic here. It was a little bit disappointing, though, obviously, but not particularly surprising. As you said, the comment about there already being 4 rectangular stadia within 80 kilometers of the Brisbane CBD was an interesting one. Let's put it that way. As you mentioned, like the Gold Coast is the biggest one nearby, and that's 27,000. And I went there last week for the wonderful game against Bahrain. No, but like I took that train ride, and that was about an hour and 20 minutes down. You know, for a one-off event, a one-off football game, that's fine, that's suitable, but you wouldn't be doing that every day. That doesn't service Brisbane. The other stadiums were at Redcliffe, as you said. Redcliffe, I'm pretty sure KO is in the Morton City Council region, so it's not technically in the Brisbane City Council area, but that's a good 30 kilometers north of the Brisbane CBD. And the Raw have had that experience already, and it wasn't an experiment that worked. You know, if I live in North Brisbane, for me, it's a 20, 25-minute drive. But even if I took the train and public transport out there, it would probably take me just under an hour. And if you live on the south side of Brisbane, or I know there are Brisbane fans that live on the Gold Coast, that's too far to travel for a one-off match, you know, or even a regularly, I should say. It's a lot to ask anyone, and it didn't work. The other 2 stadiums, one of which was Suncorp Stadium, that's got its own problems, and happy to talk about that. And the other one is Ballymore, and that's also got public transport issues. It's not accessible. The closest train station is about 1.5 kilometers. And I've talked about this before, but like I'm a relatively fit man in his 30s. And I went to Ballymore for the Royal Women's Opener last year in 35-degree heat, and it was excruciating. It was not a fun walk. It wasn't great. And that's for me. If you were a person with a disability or elderly or trying to take your kids there, the only option you have is to drive, and there's no parking nearby.
Yeah, tell us a bit about the situation with Suncorp, because the Broncos and the Dolphins play there. Potentially their women's teams could play there. The Reds play there. Obviously the Raw play there. I think they were talking about lifting the caps on how many concerts can be played there. Is that just all a part of the problem, that it's just overused and it makes the quality of the pitch terrible?
That's probably the biggest problem. We could talk about the other problem after that, but yeah, Suncorp very much has a over congestion issue, fixture congestion issue.
Yeah.
I've actually literally finished doing some number crunching today, and this year the amount of matches and events played on Suncorp Stadium is at 63 by the end of this year. That's like once every 5 days on average. It's way too overused. Every time there's a concert, it tears the pitch up, and then you add in rugby league, rugby union, regular football, additional matches. It's too much. You could have the best ground staff in the world, and Suncorp probably have extremely good ground staff, and they're probably working very hard. But at the end of the day, grass needs time to grow, and it's not getting that time. And when you play football, you need the ball on the pitch. Any little bobble can change everything.
Yeah. So you said that was one part of it. Was there another part of the Suncorp issue, or was it just the overcongestion, or what was the other part?
Yeah, the other part of the Suncorp issue is the size of the stadium. It's
of
too
course,
big.
yeah.
So it holds 52,000 people, and when you can pack out 52,000 people, it's loud. That apparently the shootout against France was the loudest they've ever recorded a sporting event there, which is louder than Origin, which is saying something.
Yeah.
But if you can't pack it out, it's not going to do the job. And it is a dead, dull atmosphere when you don't have enough people in it. That's just not the Raw in this instance. I think even at its peak, someone said the Raw at their height were averaging about 15,000 people. But last year it was closer to about 6,500, I think.
So with your petition, you spoke about Perry Park being the one you wanted to see get upgraded. Why Perry Park?
It would be incredibly transformative for football in Brisbane. We talked about the quality of the pitch issues at Suncorp. Those would be gone. You'd be talking about having, that smaller crowd in a much smaller space, which generates atmosphere. You get atmosphere going, people are going to want to come along, join in, have fun with that. At the moment, you can't really have that at Suncorp Stadium. You'd be creating a more appropriate professional home for women's sport as well, especially for the Raw women. At the moment, they do play at Perry Park, but it's not really up to the standard of that legacy we were talking about earlier. It's not what you would want a professional football league to be playing out of, especially having just hosted a Women's World Cup. At a small level, like when we started the petitions, we really were focused on the national second division as well. Brisbane United had been the bid trying to get into Perry Park. Brisbane United has ceased to exist as a bid, and what's happening with the second division, your guess is as good as mine at the moment.
Yeah.
But even the Strikers are the current tenants there. They're in the NPL. Oh, no, sorry, they're in the FQPL at the moment, I believe. But, below the A-League level. They play there. They would benefit from that. Football Queensland as a whole would probably benefit from that. They played their NPL finals at Suncorp recently. And there was about 4,300 people there to watch it. But again, you've got that giant cavern of a stadium. You could play that in Perry Park and have a proper home for football there in Bowen Hills. I've said a little while ago, I would love that to be like the equivalent of Wembley in Queensland. Have a place where everyone goes, that's where I want to play football at Queensland. Yeah, in Queensland. I want to play a cup final there. I want to play on that turf. I want that to be a home. It would change a lot. And look, I know I'd prefer it just to be for football, but if we're talking seriously, at the end of the day, if it needed to be something like multi-purpose to get it up and running, the Queensland Reds, like I said, they're averaging about 15,000 people. You could put that in Perry Park and it would be a fire. And Suncorp's always there for the bigger games. But, you need to have a smaller stadium in the city to service that need.
I'll ask one more question. State election coming up. I guess if the opposition wins or if the current government wins, do you think there'll be any positive news we could get out of in terms of getting an upgrade to Perry Park or potentially getting a completely new boutique stadium somewhere else in the city? Is that a possibility depending on the results of the election? And I'm not encouraging anyone to vote one way or the other, but just from your perspective, do you think there's a possibility?
Well, look, from my perspective, honestly, we'd hope that whoever wins government would see, the value of Perry Park and would come to help us out with that and would come to the party. I think it's not outside the realms of possibility. If there's a change of government, if the government's the same, I think the driving factor there is the Olympics. We've got 8 years until we're supposed to host this event. We're hosting it after LA, which has, I think, the best stadium infrastructure on the planet. I really just don't want to be embarrassed as a city. So I think ultimately that's going to involve spending a lot of money on stadia. And I think Perry Park has a huge role to play in that. But we talked about that. I mentioned Graham Quirk earlier, I think, and his review said we don't need a 20,000 seat stadium in Toowoomba. So they need another venue for football at the Olympics at the moment. I think Perry Park seems as good a place as any, and that would leave a proper legacy, as we were talking about. Whoever wins, I hope they see what a benefit a place like Perry Park would be for the city, for the state. I'm more hopeful than not. I think regardless of the election outcome, I think we'll start to see some movement on this. And if the Raw do put in $10 million or so to start that process, perhaps that's the impetus that government will need once the election's decided. I genuinely believe that until football can sort out its own infrastructure, be that with government help or privately funded, we won't ever move forward as a league and as a country in terms of our football development. Not just on Perry Park, but just across the country. These are the sorts of stadia and infrastructure we need to get built. Once clubs own their stadiums, they've got a revenue source with which they can develop, with which they can invest. For me, that's ultimately why something like this is so important.